Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all again for being here. It is my pleasure to welcome Farmer Mai to join our Climate Farm School community today and share a little bit more about some amazing work in grains, organic crop production, and farmer organizing. Um, Farmer Mai I've known about Farmer Mai for really, I think, as long as I've been interested in sustainable and organic agriculture in California. And yeah, I believe our paths have crossed maybe a few times, and there's just been a lot of inspiration drawn, I think, from establishing a regional grain economy in parts of California and obviously other parts of the country. This is a huge goal and focus area as well. And I think just the combination of organizing, activism, social justice, and farming sustainably is a really powerful combination, and Mai sort of brings all these things into the work on the land. So I am delighted to hear more about what you've been up to, Mai, in recent years, including parenting and that whole delightful journey. So we might not focus on that today, really, but thank you again very much for being here, and I'll pass it over to you to further introduce yourself and yeah, invite people into your talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction and inviting me to be here today. So as I talk a little bit more about myself, and I think really wanting to address the frequently asked question for me up front of how did a Vietnamese American child of refugees end up being a wheat farmer? I'll get into that. But I'd also just love to see who is here today, what brings you. So if you could drop into the chat, just like where you're located, understanding this group is national, where you're located, what sort of sector you identify with, where a lot of your skills or time is dedicated. And then also, if you tell me what your favorite, like, grain product is. Maybe not everybody eats wheat, but maybe your thing that is made from grains. I'd love to hear, what food you enjoy that is your go-to carb.
Mm.
So, yeah, and for me, I'll say, so right now I'm calling in from San Diego, California. That's where my parents and community are, and I do a lot of consulting work down here to support a cooperative ecosystem. And so this taps into a little bit of what Lainey was pointing to, sort of my off-farm work. So I support a lot of small scale, a lot of BIPOC-owned businesses to either convert to worker ownership in a democratic governance system, so a cooperative business, or also farmers to get together to form agricultural cooperatives. So gaining an economy of scale by working together democratically. And I think these are key forms of reorganizing how we relate to each other, how we make decisions about the land and our food, democratizing it. That's really essential for us to move forward in an equitable and helpful way. So that's where I'm calling in from. And my sectors, Lainey had mentioned the food and farming broadly, but really also I'm a climate activist, a social justice activist, and we'll touch on those areas. And my own favorite carb, actually, I was just mentioning to Lainey and Ryan this morning that my family has the norovirus right now, so food is a tricky entity to be in relationship right now. Not a lot wants to be accepted in our bodies, but I am relying a lot on rice porridge at the moment, so not a wheat product in order to acclimate here. But I'm gonna pop into the chat just to see, yeah, who's here. Looks like, oh, Carlsbad, super close. Ooh, millets, yum. Sebastopol, of course, yeah. Brooklyn, a Brooklyn baker, nice. Another Brooklynite, pizza and tacos. LA, ooh, Faro, yes. A broad category, and very also versatile. Philly, Indianapolis. Great. That's great that you're all seeing how your sector connects to climate change. And I think also nice to see that, because I often interact with people. I did a lot of organizing with beginning farmers, and there's also people who are not
Mm.
quite beginning farmers, they're interested in becoming farmers, and it's an association of like, if I'm gonna address climate change, I have to be a farmer. And it's great to see that you all are staying in your areas of expertise and seeing how that applies.
Mm.
um, Born and raised in France, now living in Boston, software engineering, great.
Mm.
um, Thanks for the commiseration with norovirus. And Nashville, great. So we have so many different places represented and different grains brought up. Thanks so much for participating in that and just giving me a sense of where you're coming from and what nourishes you. So yeah, in terms of what I want to cover today, I've bounced around a lot of ideas with Lainey. I think because I was invited in to talk about regenerative grains, and then hearing about kind of the audience here and you all being people who are from different sectors interested in how you might apply your work to farming and food and how it relates to climate change or mitigating it. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time actually talking about my own journey, like I said, from being a San Diegan urban child of refugees to becoming a grain farmer, but also just along the way, this path that I've taken and this commitment that I've made to trying to fight climate change and to advance social equality, how all of that has come into farming for me, and how it continues to manifest in my farming and also the work that I do to support other farmers, right, in the broader ecosystem. So from there, then I want to get into how grains can be a part of fighting climate change, and that it's not just about how we grow it, but it's also about how we use it, and then what that means for the kind of grain economy that we need, the one that we are still just starting to build, and what's next there. So that's a glimpse into our journey today. And throughout that time, I'm gonna ask you to participate in the chat a bit, and there'll be times maybe where we can go off camera if you want. So just giving you that heads up if you want to be able to situate yourself in a way where you have keyboard access, and also if you wanted to get your Zoom background together for being off camera. No pressure. I mean, I have 2 kids, so if it's a tornado back there, no judgment on my part. But yeah, so for me, my journey, I would say, starts with being a kid who grew up in a neighborhood where we grew food that was important to us in our traditions, in our rituals. I grew up Buddhist, and we have many rituals that pertain to feeding our ancestors as well as feeding ourselves. And with my community having come from Vietnam, and uh, not having our foods necessarily reflected in grocery stores, easily accessible, we carved out whatever spaces we could in order to grow these foods that had been a part of our ancestry and had nourished us for generations, right? And so I grew up with this ethos of food as being a part of our lineage, a part of our medicine, and a part of our community as a way to connect with each other too. So I also would go to temple and cook with my grandmother, and we would provide food for the community. And so many people who came without their families, and a lot of young men who were the first ones sent over by their families. And being the way that our society is gendered, not a lot of them being able to having the tools to cook. And so this grounding of food as a way of bringing communities together and also supporting people in this time of transition was such um, a formative experience for me. And so throughout my time exploring where I wanted to be in the world, what did I want to do to have a positive impact, and seeing that we need to tackle climate change, we need to address social inequality, our widening gaps, right? And how do we do that in a way that weaves together nature and food has just been a through line for me. So when I went to college, I became one of those like really militant environmentalists and got deep into trying to address climate change. And I ended up studying atmospheric physics. I made climate models. It's really far from the food sector. But I started making climate models and trying to understand climate over time. And I I became pretty dissatisfied with sitting at a computer and looking at a screen and making these models. So then I got into the field research end of things and ended up working in the Alaskan Arctic, measuring carbon fluctuation in the tundra and seeing these astronomical numbers of how much carbon was in the atmosphere there, and understanding that so much of that was coming from those southern latitudes, right? That our Arctic and Antarctic regions were the sites sequestering or trying to sequester our carbon. And while I was there, I was vegan, very challenging to do in the Alaskan Arctic, where the main diet is walrus and caribou. But I found this bag of flour in the back of my Quonset hut, and I was so excited. I was like, yes. And it was also a season for Hamantaschen. Some of you are familiar with that cookie. So I made Hamantaschen and I took a bite into this cookie, and it was just so rancid. And I had never experienced rancid flour before. And I didn't realize like flour could be dead. And this experience of trying to connect with these foods that were comforts to me in a different place was just it was a moment that ties into this story that I'll continue with, but of my exploration of grains. But anyways, from there, being isolated in the Arctic and just seeing these numbers of how much carbon we were putting out there, I wanted to do something on the other side. I didn't want to just research how things are going terribly. I wanted to be a part of the solution so that we were not emitting so much carbon and just dealing with the effects of climate change. So then I actually went to the opposite side, which is like impacts of climate change. I worked in disaster management and worked in Southeast Asia in refugee camps where people had been displaced because of typhoons and these disasters that were being exacerbated by climate change, and connecting back to my original research in college where I had studied hurricanes and the changing levels of extremes over time because of climate change. So then seeing the impacts of it, the devastation from climate extremes. I also, working in this refugee camp, came around to thinking, my parents left refugee camps so that I could thrive and be a person who lives according to what I want to do in my dreams. And so I ended up leaving the refugee camps in order to work in refugee resettlement. And I came back to San Diego, came back to the community I grew up in, and focused on food security. And in that work, worked on a lot of food access. So with farmers markets, creating the first farmers market that had a food stamp and WIC SSI match program. So now that's become a national program, which is terrific. It's a way for people to be able to afford farmers market produce without the farmers needing to lower their prices, and it becomes a kind of backdoor subsidy for farmers. And in that work, just finding the demand for Southeast Asian crops in my community, where people did value fresh farm produce. They cared about the conditions of farmers, and that there was only one farm that we could bring in to provide that kind of produce. So I feel like I could go on about my path here. You see that it was a bit meandering. So I want to cut ahead to when I went to grad school, and I was in Toronto. And for those of you who have gone to grad school or been in the ivory tower for a long time, for me, and maybe perhaps you experienced this, just the deep yearning to be connected to something tangible, something physical, stepping outside of that really cerebral realm. And so I started working on farms. And I also started up a worker cooperative restaurant that's sourced directly from farms. And in that experience, a farmer brought me a loaf of bread made from red Fife wheat. Have any of you heard of red Fife? I'm going to go on gallery to see if there are any hands up. Actually, do I know how to do gallery? Thanks. Any hands up? Red Fife? No. Well, Lainey. Okay, great. One person. So red Fife is this variety of wheat. And for me, I had never known that wheat had different varieties and that I would be able to taste the difference. And so I had this loaf of bread that was like nice and red brown, and I ate it and I was like, oh my goodness, it's like nutty. It's got these like kind of current taste. I was just like, oh, this is when people get excited about wine. You can get excited about bread in this way. And it was just like this portal world opening moment, to realize like, what else have I been denied of? If there's this flavorful wheat that could have existed, I could have been eating it my whole life. And yeah, but what else exists that I don't know about? So in that moment of recognizing there's more to wheat, there's more to food, there's more diversity than just the realm of diversity that I saw in the arena of vegetables, right? Where I was saying like we needed more Southeast Asian vegetables. I was like, wow, there's all these kinds of wheats. And so if we are going to have a full diet, we need to figure out how do we incorporate grains and vegetables, and that when we look at grains, that there are more options out there than what we know about. So I decided to go back to California, get into farming, and to grow this full diet on the farm. And in that context of California, when I look at grains, seeing that grains are that giant base of our food pyramid, and seeing that what makes the most sense for our arid, increasingly drought-ridden climate was to grow wheat. It was maybe not a surprise then, but now I feel like, yeah, looking back, it's like, oh, I never would have thought that from being a climate modeler that eventually I would have been growing wheat. And not just because of just the occupation itself, but the kind of crop and the associations that I had with it. And I actually am curious, now that I'm in this super niche world of heirloom grains, I would love to hear from you what comes up for you when you hear wheat. Just like free word association, drop into the chat. I won't feel judged if there are words that have negative connotations. I've been called the devil at farmers markets for growing for, selling wheat. So short of name calling, like it's, I've heard it all, and I'm sure you'll be civil about it. So we've got glyphosate, gluten, yes, for sure. Russia, Ukraine, bread, French baguette, overconsumed, so GMO, bread, monoculture, versatile, and monocrop. Yeah, I see that you could see both sides there. Subsidies, yeah. Bread, pasta, delicious. Grasslands, lacking genetic diversity, lacking in nutrients. Yeah, thanks so much. Feel free to keep populating, but I think you've hit a lot of the things that that have come up for me, and then also more recently in terms of Nisha, you bringing up Russia, Ukraine. Yeah, I would love to get into that. Wheat porridge, not in the keto diet, right? So, I mean, what I'm seeing here is how, wheat connects to an understanding of our conventional ways of farming, right? Talking about glyphosate and monoculture being a monocrop. And also that it can be versatile. And on the other side, just how wheat is very much related to all these foods that I'm assuming people are bringing up because they enjoy them. French baguettes, bread, pasta, delicious, as Laura says. And that to get there, we're also grappling with what Sue's bringing up in terms of it being associated with being nutrient deficient, right? So these were all the considerations that I had getting into growing grains, and thinking back to that experience with Red Fife, of wondering, with the associations that I have, a lot of them listed here, the negative associations of being something that has been a part of climate change, right? A third of our atmospheric carbon comes from the soil, from tillage, and so much of that land and tillage has been to grow wheat, right? And not just in the US, but globally, through our processes of colonization, have pushed so many other countries to grow wheat for our consumption, for global export. And then through the Green Revolution and patenting, also an extension of colonization, right? Limiting the varieties of wheat out there, and it being a form of control and disempowering other cultures, other societies and governments. And then also what we end up getting, right, is this bleached, denatured carb that also more recently, right, has been really demonized for its gluten content and all of that, and causing illnesses. Books like Wheat Belly, a lot of focus on just trying to get rid of wheat from our diets. So when I started farming, I was like, how can we do this differently? And can wheat be not only healthful for the land, but also for our bodies, right? And I was so fortunate to be able to apprentice at the Mendocino Grain Project in California. It's about 3 hours north of San Francisco. And it was this hub of Northern California grain growers, most of them in their 70s, second career farmers who had come around to recognizing that we need to grow wheat differently. We need to grow different kinds of wheat. And so when I got into this farm, I saw over 10 different varieties of wheat and triticale and different kinds of rye. And we were part of a community that was trying to build the infrastructure in order to save the seeds these different varieties that were not patented, that weren't available through seed companies. And I'm guessing from earlier when I asked who knows Red 5, I think someone later chimed in to say that they did, but I was going to ask if anyone can name any other varieties, which you're welcome to drop into the chat, but it seems like maybe that's a realm that we can explore together, rather than relying too hard on the chat here. But yeah, triticale is a cross between rye and wheat. It's a natural crossing. And yeah, Lainey, Sonora. Yeah, Sonora is the oldest known wheat in the Americas. Huarani, one of the oldest known wheats in society. Eichhorn, yeah, that is the correct spelling. And so yeah, these are some. And the thing is that when I got onto this farm, I was like, okay, there's these 10 varieties that are being grown. How many are there? It turns out that there are, okay, this is jelly bean in the jar question here. Who wants to guess how many varieties of wheat, known varieties of wheat there are? Approximately. I'm gonna have to be down to the last integer here, but 45. Okay, you go up maybe another logarithmic 2,500. Another scale, though that's close to the number of varieties that we have enough of in order to like eat. But known varieties that exist of wheat. Thanks for jumping the scale, Hillary, and you're in the right scale. I'll leave it there. We could double that. It's about 30,000. 30,000 varieties of wheat that we know about. And of the 30,000, we have about 1,000 that can be cultivated for consumption. That's to say that we have enough of the seed stock, as opposed to the ones that are just being held in a germplasm to be spliced at some point. So when I looked at that, I was like, wow, okay, 1,000, and then how many are there available through seed companies? And there are 5. And there's a huge difference in what that entails in terms of how we grow them and then how we eat them. But first on the how we grow. So where we are at globally with the wheat that we grow coming from the Green Revolution, there's a heavy emphasis on having low, like a foot tall stand of wheat, because that way the plant puts energy towards the seed and not the stalk. And then also these varieties, they're heavily dependent on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides in order to grow, right? And then the mention of glyphosate or Roundup is used not only to kill off weeds, but it's also used for drying the grain. So it's a desiccant that's sprayed on it. And to ripen the grains, especially in the Midwest where they have summer rains. Very foreign concept for me here. And what we see is that kind of farming is a part of climate change and the problem, right? It's destroying our landscapes. It makes us more dependent on fossil fuels because of these inputs. And then we're eating these toxins, right? And so what I was finding on the farm that I was working on in this community was that the grains that we were growing and the grains that I've continued to grow, they grow to be 5 to 6 feet tall. And what's amazing about that in terms of annuals is that annuals, as in plants that they die off every year, versus perennials, is that by growing to be 5 to 6 feet tall, that is 5 to 6 times more carbon that we're capturing from the atmosphere, right, than the commodity grains. And that stock, that carbon, we can harvest to be straw, hay, and lesser known news, but very important, is that there is a straw shortage in the US and globally because of declines in wheat production and rye production in particular. And that straw is actually really important for reincorporating carbon into the soil, for building swales and ways for us to channel water in a gentle way where we can reincorporate water and restore our groundwater, which is of course very important in California, right? So looking at these wheat varieties and different heirloom grains and saying, wow, you actually can be a part of mitigating climate change by capturing more carbon. That is amazing. And also, I've selected grains, these heirloom varieties, to be drought tolerant. And so most commodity grain relies on 120 inches of water to grow. And I've adapted my grains to grow off of 12 inches. So just 10% of the amount of water that conventional grain uses. And I rely exclusively on rainfall, so I'm not pumping from our groundwater sources, right? Another facet of the farming that I'm doing and how it relates to selecting these particular varieties of seeds is that also I rotate them with animals, not by year, which I would love to be able to do if I owned land and didn't have to pay rent for even the years that I fallow, but throughout the growing season. So actually, I remember now that I did queue up some photos. Wow, this Zoom banner set of options has really expanded since I've used the last. Let's see. Here we are. Okay, so actually this is a photo of my friend who works with draft horses, and a part of me trying to move the farm away from fossil fuel dependency is also using draft animals as much as I can. And so here is where seeds are being broadcast, because the nice thing about wheat versus vegetables you really want to plant in a row, and it's laboriously backbreaking for the human. And here with grains, the benefit is that you can broadcast them and they will take to the ground and grow really well. So for those who have not had experience on the farm, tractors for seeding, it's inevitable that the tractor will leak its diesel, its hydraulic fuel and fluids. And so this is a way to make sure that the ground retains its health and isn't just a pool for more petrochemicals, right? And even with organic systems, right, people are still relying on the equipment that's been built for us. And then here are some sheep that are rotating through. And when I was doing some research on historical grain production in California, I saw these photos of like wheat fields, but they had sheep in them. And I was like, what? That's not a wheat field, that's a sheep field. And came to learn that what people had been doing was grazing sheep in order to do weed management as the grains were growing, and then also after the grains had already come up. And so this is, while the wheat's growing up, you can see the grass there, and the sheep, are they eating the grains? Yes, they are. And that's where selecting for heirloom grains that like to be grazed and actually become stimulated by that is really key. So when the sheep nibble on this grass, the grains, it gets a signal to them that there's some kind of danger. So they actually shoot down their roots to be even deeper. So that's even more carbon that's being captured from the atmosphere and going into the ground. And then it also freaks them out to be more productive. They're like, oh, dang, there's some threats. We got to produce more seed. And so when they come up, they tiller more, they produce more grains. And so there's that benefit, while also having gained natural nutrients from the sheep, doing their thing. They do poop where they eat, which is a benefit to us. So that's how they factor in into the system. And I also grow legumes, mostly crimson clover and annual. So that provides nitrogen, additional nitrogen for the long term for the grains, filling in the gaps where the sheep might not have gotten in. So I'll stop the screen share for now. Where'd you all go? Stop share. Okay. Okay, so that's where we are at with the farming aspects. Dry farming, weed management with animals rather than chemicals. I'm going to tap Laura to remind me if there's anything else that I've mentioned to you that I'm not remembering to bring up here. Dry farming, organic, not certified because it's expensive. Pests, there's not a lot of small scale pests that go after the grains. It's really what I find are like deer who love to come in, or several times that I at one site where I had farmed where like wild boars would come through, which was both like terrifying and very cute because those little like boarlets, I don't know what they're called when they're babies, but they'd like run around. So when they come in, it's not so much to eat the grains, but because, like I'm saying, that they're these 5 to 6 foot tall fields in regions, Sonoma County and Mendocino County, but more so Sonoma, where a lot of the woodland ecosystems have been destroyed, it actually was a respite for them. So finding these tall grasses was a way for them to be able to find some cool in the shade and also, hide from predators. And as I mentioned, raised Buddhist, and part of our philosophy is that we are in one world, one ecosystem. We are responsible for taking care of each other, including animals. And so I just accept that. And it's not a food safety issue. That has come up before. For anyone who's maybe worked for the USDA. Yeah. Deer in the grains, not a food safety issue. So, and then Julian, can these sustainable practices be done at a huge scale on mega farms, or does it require more local, smaller farms? And I think that, I think there's 2 ways to answer that question, which is, one is, I think you can grow at a large, I think yes. I think one way to answer is yes, you can do these rotations, and when people own land, it gets possible to have also that longer term rotation. And at the same time, I think my other question is sort of like, why do we need to maintain huge scale or mega farms? Right. And I think that my question there relates to how that pertains to our needs for diversifying our perspectives on how we manage the land, and then who owns it, and also how it relates to labor practices, and who owns it, who works it, and then how is that land distributed according to merits of who works it. So different portal, but I think I will, let's see, we have 15 minutes. I did want to have a Q&A portion, and so I got too excited seeing your question, Julian. I'm going to answer them later. And please feel free to keep populating questions in the chat so that we can keep track of it for the Q&A. But what I do want to get into is this food and nutrition side, because as much as we can talk about the farming and the benefits of grains and annuals in fighting climate change, and I brought up annuals again because so much of the conversation about farming to fight climate change is about perennials, and perennials like trees, orchards, like what's in the back of Ryan's photo there, right? It's like, it depends, it's really reliant on people having land security or owning land, being there long term. The reality is that 60% of farmers in California don't own their land, right? And so we can't negate those farmers being a part of our climate solutions, right? And so how do we integrate something like annuals and a food that we all, or many people eat, right? That's such a big part of our diet into fighting climate change. And so I think that that's a really key aspect of thinking about how wheat is a part of our necessary tool set for climate change solutions. I've been talking for a while and that norovirus is still there. I gotta drink some water. Okay, so yeah, to get people excited about these grains though, we gotta talk about the food part. And I wanna refer back to that list that you had helped populate with, that wheat though is associated with lacking in nutrients, and gluten, and I think there's like fear and also just sort of like acceptance, sort of like, I guess I'll eat this. It doesn't really have nutrients, but I'll eat it because it's everywhere. It's hard to avoid. But it doesn't have to be like that. So as I mentioned, my experience with red fife and this like flavor explosion in my mouth, as much as you can have a flavor explosion with wheat, was amazing. And having grown different varieties since then, I found that by growing these heirloom varieties that not only are so helpful in the field, but also these varieties are ones where the bran, germ, and endosperm, those are the three main parts of the grain. So the endosperm is the main starchy part. The germ is where when you germinate, right, that's the part that's going to grow the new plant. And then the bran is sort of the outer coating. Those are the three main parts. And these heirloom varieties have this natural balance between them, as opposed to referring back to the kinds of grains that I mentioned before from the Green Revolution. The shorter stalks also, they selected for and crossed and bred wheat so that it just had a larger endosperm so that the bran and the germ could be removed. And the reason for that is because the bran and the germ have a lot of the nutrients that can go rancid, but the endosperm, that's the carbohydrate that's more stable. And then with bleaching, so when you see flour that says unbleached, you know that the norm is actually bleaching. And so that makes it more shelf stable, which was helpful for colonizing countries to be able to ship flour long distances to feed colonizers, and then also to then spread out and suppress local food production and create reliance on the country that was doing colonizing. So that's how we got to this wheat that lacks nutrients, is this colonial history that affects all of us. And what we can do instead is to grow these varieties that have this balance of bran, germ, endosperm, and keep that intact through a milling process that doesn't sift. And that in itself is a whole nother conversation, and connected to this piece about like, what does it look like to build a new regional grain economy, is that we actually need different kinds of mills, because the roller mills that we rely on were built so that it slips the endosperm out of the bran, slips the germ out, so that you can just have that starch. It's like I had this activity that I wanted to do, and we have 10 minutes. I think we can fit it in and still do Q&A. So what I would love for us to do is to go into gallery view. Lainey, if you could help with that again, or maybe it was Ryan, somebody that can do it faster than me. What I want to do is for us to be a part of visualizing what is actually a part of a whole grain. Thank you. Okay, so what I would like for us to do is to have people go off camera first, for everyone to go off camera. And then we will go through, I would like people to raise their hand to volunteer to be a different part of a whole grain. Okay, I think I listed maybe more than the number of participants we have here, but we'll make it work. Okay, so first, so imagine this grain, you've got the bran, endosperm, and germ. First, we'll go with the outer layer, the bran. Okay, the bran has fiber. Who wants to volunteer to be fiber? You raise your hand. Anyone? Oh, we lost some people. I wonder if this activity has got a little scary. Hillary, thank you. Hillary, can you go on camera and remember that you are fiber? And then, thank you. Someone else raised their, was it Lainey, or did you raise your hand? Because I need someone to be vitamin B1, thiamine. Okay, Lainey, and then Jaya, will you be B2 riboflavin? And both of you go off camera if you don't mind. Who's B3? Who wants to be B3? Niacin. Ryan, thank you. How about B6? Chloe, B6, thank you. How about folate? Chloe, you are B6, right? So I need someone, anyone to be folate. It's hidden and react. Okay. I think also, I think part of this activity was asking people to go off camera, which maybe people don't want to do. But you could also raise your hand and just like volunteer yourself and not go off camera. Proful, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, thanks for volunteering. You're folate? Is that? Okay. So we also still need someone to be iron. Anyone want to raise their hand? Okay, I know it's tricky. I mean, you didn't know that you signed up for being in a thing where we might go off camera. Okay, for now, I'm gonna just go ahead and name the others. And for those who are volunteers, please keep your screens on. But we've got, so the bran also contains iron, zinc, magnesium, antioxidants, phytonutrients, right? And then also selenium and phosphorus. God forbid I forget. Germ has fats, vitamin E, and then also more B vitamins, phytonutrients, antioxidants. And then the endosperm has carbs, protein, some B, and minerals. Okay, anyone want to volunteer to be the endosperm? It's carbs. Anyone want to be, I'll be the carbs. I'll be carbs. All right, so, oh, Nisha, you want to be carbs? Where'd you go? Thank you, Nisha. Okay, so great to see all your faces, great to see the whole grain and all these different elements. And then, but what happens, right, through roller milling is that then the rest of us go away. So everyone except for Nisha, go away, turn off your screens, right? And Nisha, it's great that you happen to have a photo up for your avatar already, so we see your face. You are the face of wheat. And what we're missing out on, that fiber that is so important for us to have a healthy gut biome, right? For the past 10,000 years, humans relied on grains for 80% of our dietary fiber. So when we think about our gut flora and gut bacteria, probiotics, right? We need fiber in order for that bacteria to live in our guts. Otherwise, our bodies are just, it's a slippy slide out the other side, right? And that's gone. We don't have that when we don't have the whole grain. We have through the century and a half, re-added some nutrients because we realized that they were really important to have in our bodies. So who was thiamine? B1, B2 riboflavin, B3 niacin. Come back. Thank you. And I don't know if there's like a way for, oh, and folate. Who's folate? Folate.
That's me.
Thank you. Oh yeah. Thanks for changing your name. Okay, so you're back. But the thing is that you're not actually back as yourselves. So I don't know if you can like make your screen weird or put your hair in your face or something like that, but you're actually not back in the grain as you are. Because what happened is that for enrichment purposes, you're added back, but you're actually derived from synthetics, and some of you are derived from coal. Folate is not folate anymore, even though it's super important for our neural development. It helps form our myelin sheath, which goes around your nerves. Anyways, that's how we are ourselves, right? Get around and talk. It's actually brought back as folic acid, which turns out has deleterious long-term effects for female bodies in particular. Anyways, so you're back, but kind of as a weird Frankenstein's monster, not really yourself. Grayscale, love it, Lainey. Love that touch. So we've created this really elaborate system to try to bring back any modicum of nutrients into whole grains, into grains themselves, not even whole grains, just wheat. And it's had a significant negative impact on our health, right? We know so many diet-related illnesses are related to not having whole grains, that having all-purpose flour that's been bleached, denatured is just, it causes sugar spikes, leads to diabetes, right? And the lack of fiber relating to like different, fiber being related to a lot of cancer prevention, especially colon cancer, right? We're missing out on all of that. And so rather than trying to add back these different pieces from synthetic means, we can actually just eat the whole grain. So thank you everyone for participating in that. And I do want to also just do a little screen share of just, just an enticing loaf of bread that is made from 100% whole wheat Chidon Blanc de Mars, which is one of my favorite varieties to grow. And that when we bring back all these parts and have this full set of nutrients, we're not just bringing back our health, but we're also bringing back just flavor and the delightful, joyful experience of eating and being human and enjoying in a multisensory way what we can grow from the earth when we grow it well, and be able to share it with each other so that we can continue to be in community, drawing from the old phrase, break bread with each other, and connect to what we already have in order to solve for our climate and social issues. Thanks so much for listening to my talk, and we have like 3 minutes for questions, and happy to take them here, and then also feel free to email me and I will eventually respond.
Maya, you want to go ahead? Oh,
yeah, I have the same question that Lainey, you posted in the chat. Are you available to teach people how to grow grains?
I am, yeah. Growing and also processing.
Okay.
So, growing is probably relatively the easiest, and then the rest of it having the tools to process it so you can eat it. I'm also there for those steps.
Great. How would we reach you?
My email is my@farmermy.com.
Okay.
And that's probably the easiest. Lainey, how do you usually moderate questions?
Yeah, I will pull up a few from the chat that I've been noticing and just throw them out to you. But if anyone also, since we're getting to be a smaller group, if anyone sees or realizes their question hasn't been asked yet, feel free to jump in the next couple minutes. And I can stay on a little bit past 10 if needed to help tie things up. But one question that came in earlier was about electric vehicles in the farming space, and if these are another potential solution along with draft horses if they're there yet.
I think that there are not a lot of I have not heard of. I think maybe John Deere was maybe developing an electric tractor. I think there's like two things that we need to grapple with. One is like, yes, electrification is useful. How much electricity do we need to run these tractors? And then also a lot of rural places face electricity insecurity. In California, because of our wildfires, we have frequent power outages, and so that's been a problem already for our irrigation. For those who rely on irrigation, you need a pump, and so I think that's something that we need to grapple with, is just the grid itself, and also how do we make that sustainable? And I think on the other part of the affordability piece, right, is that would those be subsidized, or is there a way? This is actually the thing that I'm going to put out there, and please just, if you make it, please just give me a portion of your stock or something like this. But it's just bringing back the whole apparatus of veggie oil as fuel, right? Just like getting the fryer oil and refining that, and in not a too intensive process, but just like what we were seeing in like the early aughts, right? The kind of just like filtering, because what we see is so much of the existing tractors that I think in reality need to kind of preserve those frames. And so what's a lower stakes, easier conversion is to convert to veggie oils for this diesel.
Yeah, very cool. I think that was mentioned in Bob Quinn's book, Grain by Grain. When I read that a couple years ago, I think they're making veggie oil from like sunflower seed crop rotations on his farm in Montana. But I should, yeah, I would love to see that take off a little bit more too. And I did have another question for you, Mai, about the genetic diversity of wheat and finding wheat varieties that are suited to particular locations and conditions like drought tolerance. I've been looking and interested in the work of the Bread Lab up in Washington State, and I'm wondering if there's anything similar either in California or other parts of the country, or if like that's a common pool resource that like you or other farmers and bakers and processors draw on to access wheat and grains with genetic diversity and traits that you want.
Yeah, UC Davis is largely funded by Monsanto, and so their research has been limited, but there is a postdoc there who's been really leading the way, Allison Krill, on trying to bring in organic seeds. But they, I think something to consider about Bread Lab and that difference there, and also like the grain work in California, is that I think Bread Lab has done a lot of crossings to develop new varieties. Here we have a lot of the UC bread kind of varieties as well, modern. And I want to highlight that we already have this like 1,000 set of varieties that I think we can revive and trial, and that's what I'm trying to do, because I think there's a directness, right? I know it doesn't prop up a kind of like research industry of, applying for grants and all of that, but that realm is so precarious, and talking with the researchers there where, they're constantly also fighting for the land that they can grow there with, against the like Monsanto funded research projects, right? And we already know that this set of 1,000 varieties have already survived 10,000 years of change. And I think there's value in, at the same time, trying to trial those and policy work to ensure that those seeds remain in the commons, that they're not patented, that farmers are able to save seed, share them, and adapt them, right? Because also the seed sales apparatus is a way that hinders us from doing climate adaptation by centering the production only in one place that is not representative of all the different places we're growing, is that it really limits our ability to adapt. So I think it's a both and, right? It's like, yes, we can do some crossings, and that apparatus, that infrastructure already exists, kind of like the Bread Lab, and at the same time, farmers are farming already, and so that space and that knowledge and the tools out there for that more democratic process of seed saving, trialing, and increasing, I think is something to also tap into.
Totally. Very cool. Thank you for answering that. And I realize if folks have to run, that's great. We're at time. We can send some additional follow-up questions. I could try to bundle up and organize some of them if people want to reach out to me as well, to make the email processes streamlined. Wow, I'm not able to type and talk at the same time, but here's my email in the chat. And yeah, and thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Mai, for sharing your stories and experiences and journey. I think the intersections of climate change, food security, and nutrition are like all just so well represented in the work that you've done and in wheat and grains in particular. So it's really, yeah, exciting to think about bringing all those things back to a better, healthier, more holistic system than what is currently common.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and letting me share. And yeah, I think probably it's best if the questions go to you, Lainey, first for just like summarizing, and then I can respond, and maybe Lainey can send out to all the participants. And then any of those, for those of you who want to talk more deeply or do have some consulting, feel free to reach out to me.
Amazing. Thanks. That sounds great. And we'll put that all in the follow-up email. Yeah, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lainey, how are we connecting? Would you like to do